A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are interviewing the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Many Jews believe that the Messiah will arrive all of a sudden without warning. Is it not true that Maimonides states that a Jew is required to believe that the Messiah could arrive on any day or at any time?
It is true that there are many Jews, religious Jews, and I would add many not so religious Jews, that is to say not observant Jews, who believe in the advent of the Messiah. They believe the Mashiach will just arrive one day without warning, all of a sudden. And what exactly happens at that point is an interesting question. It all depends whom you ask. Most people who think in this fashion are not actually themselves quite sure. But they do feel that the Mashiach is something that just appears, it just happens all of a sudden. They do not see it in terms of an historic and evolutionary process. They do not see it as being the culmination of human effort on the part of the Jewish people over a long period of time. And many of them will tell you that this position of theirs, which they have heard from their teachers or in school, in their homes, perhaps in the synagogue, many of them will tell you that this is the only position, this is the traditional position of Judaism, and this is also, they will tell you, what Maimonides himself believes. And they quote the famous statement of Rambam in his 13 Principles or Articles of Faith, in which he is usually quoted as having said that a Jew is required to believe that the Messiah may and can arrive at any time, on any day. The trouble with all this is, first of all, that of course it makes very little sense. In other words, the miraculous, unexpected arrival of a Mashiach figure is a very difficult concept to understand from a rational point of view. And in fact, this is not what Rambam says at all. First of all, with regards to the quote and the impression that people get regarding the Rambam's position based on that statement in his 13 Principles of Faith, it is necessary to once and for all dispel this piece of disinformation. The version, the text of those 13 Articles of Faith as they appear in certain Sidurim and other handbooks, people must know that this is not a text that the Rambam, that Maimonides wrote. He never at any time made such a statement. It's necessary for people to know that those 13 Articles of Faith, Shlosha Asar Ikarehe Emunah, of Rambam, were written by Rambam in his own hand as the introduction to one of the chapters in Masechet Sanhedrin in his commentary on the Mishnah. We have that commentary of Maimonides in the original Arabic, and we have it in accurate Hebrew translation, and it's been translated into other languages as well. And many can read the original Arabic if they wish, or the translation, and see for themselves that Rambam never made such a statement. What Rambam says is simply that a Jew must believe and know that it is a basic tenet of the Torah, of Judaism, that the Jewish people will return to their land, will reconstitute their sovereignty, their independence, and their own Jewish government in their land, and that this will involve a re-establishment of the Davidic dynasty, a monarchy based on the descendants of King David of old. And this is the idea that a Jew must be aware of and must believe in. That is what the Rambam writes in that place, and he in no way writes or even suggests that this can happen overnight in a surprising or miraculous or sudden fashion. In fact, he writes the exact opposite at the end of his famous Code of Jewish Law, the Mishneh Torah, where he writes explicitly that when a sufficient number of Jews have returned to their land and re-establish a Jewish government and have a Jewish king who is a descendant of the original house of David, who will be successful in gathering the exiles and defeating the Jewish people's enemies and rebuilding the temple, the Mikdash, etc., as he writes there, then we will be able to assume that this individual is the Mashiach, the Messiah, of which the Torah and the prophets and Chazal speak. And if he continues in all these fields and his success is overwhelming and complete, then we will know for sure, retroactively, that this man is the Melech HaMashiach, the King Messiah that was promised. This, in other words, depicts an historical process which unfolds over many years, in fact probably over many generations. First you need to have a significant mass, a critical mass of Jews who return to Eretz Yisrael. Initially they will not be independent, they will be living under some other rule, and this is exactly how things worked out. Jews began to return to our land under Ottoman Turkish rule in increasing numbers, and then later they had to live here for a time under the British mandate, and eventually, by way of hard effort and work and ideological motivation based on the most basic and fundamental principles of Judaism, the work of many, many thousands, tens of thousands of Jews over decades towards the re-establishment of an independent Jewish state in the land of Israel. This eventually took place, as we know, in Tafshin Hayt in 1948. This was not something that happened overnight, and the establishment or the re-establishment of a monarchy based on the house of David is also not something that will happen overnight. This is something that takes time. It is not a mitzvah to make it take as much time as long as possible, but it is certainly something that will take time, and it's not something that happens by surprise. It doesn't happen overnight whilst one is asleep, and all of a sudden wakes up in the morning and hears the news and discovers that the Mashiach arrived during the night. This is not how it happens. This is not how it works. That is a childish and fairy tale version of Jewish history and Jewish destiny and what the Torah is all about. And that's not what the Rambam writes. The Rambam describes the gradual return of the Jewish people, their gradual consolidation of their existence, their national existence in their homeland, and how they eventually succeed in becoming independent and sovereign people with their own king. And if that king goes on to act and succeed in certain ways, then we can begin to assume that he is the Mashiach. And if he continues in that way and indeed succeeds, then we know retroactively that he is the Mashiach. This is what the Rambam tells us, and this is what a Jew must know and believe.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. And a word to our viewers. If you would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with Rabbi Bar-Hayim in honor or memory of a loved one, or if you would like to obtain Berkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.